Okay, so you sent us these 50 everyday English words, and at first glance, it's like, okay, pretty basic stuff, right? But you really want to dig into how focusing on these, well, almost deceptively simple words can make a real difference in how natural and confident you sound when you're speaking English.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. The thing is, and the material you sent over really highlights this, a lot of people learning English, they kind of naturally gravitate towards trying to learn, bigger, more complex words, which makes sense. But what this list reminds us is that native speakers are using these core high-frequency words all the time. And mastering those, really getting comfortable with those basics, that unlocks a whole other level of fluency.
It's about getting those building blocks in place so you're not always searching for the perfect, most impressive word when maybe a simpler one does the job even better.
Right? It's not about just knowing the definition of a word. It's about being able to use it without even thinking about it.
And the way they've broken it down here is really helpful, I think. We've got categories like daily activities and actions, basic verbs, words for talking about people, transportation, shopping, feelings, tech, food, weather, the stuff we encounter every single day. So let's jump into it, shall we? Daily activities and actions. First one up, wake up, meaning, well, pretty straightforward, to stop sleeping.
And I think what's interesting about a phrasal verb like wake up is how much we use these little verb particle combos in English. It's not just about knowing wake and knowing up. It's knowing what they mean together as one unit. That's key.
Yeah, like it's almost a whole new word, wake up, not just two separate pieces.
Exactly.
Okay, so moving right along. Next we have get dressed, to put on clothes.
Simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
But essential.
And think about how often you use that phrase or some variation of it just in your daily life.
Yeah.
It's describing such a fundamental part of our routine.
Absolutely. All right, and then we've got brush, to clean with a brush. The example here is you brush your teeth before breakfast. Another daily habit tied to a specific time. And again, we're seeing that phrasal verb pattern, right? Brush your teeth. It's not just about knowing brush, it's knowing how it works with other words to create these common phrases. These are called collocations, by the way, and they're super important for sounding natural.
Right. You wouldn't really say, I clean my teeth with a brush in
Yeah.
everyday conversation. It just sounds a little off.
Exactly.
Okay, up next, we have comb, to fix your hair with a comb. The example here is you comb your hair to look neat. So it's specifically about grooming.
And while you can brush your hair, comb is more specific. It's often about detangling or styling. It's interesting how English has these, subtle distinctions, even for actions that seem pretty similar. Like you wouldn't say you comb the dog, would you? You'd brush the dog.
That's a good point. So much of it is about context.
For sure.
All right, and the last one in this category is pack, to put things into a bag. The example is you pack your lunch before leaving for work, which really highlights that sense of preparation, right?
Definitely. Pack implies organizing, putting things together for a specific reason, like you said, preparation.
All right, now we're moving on to basic verbs for everyday use. First up, we've got hold, to keep something in your hand. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and it's such a useful verb because you can hold so many different things.
You can hold a cup of coffee, you can hold a baby, you can hold, I don't know, a heavy box. But are there times when you would use a different word instead of just hold? Like a more specific word.
Absolutely there are. So while hold is kind of our general all-purpose word, verbs like, let's say, grasp, clutch, or grip, those suggest a much firmer hold, often with more intention behind it. So you might hold a baby gently, but you would grasp a railing to steady yourself.
So it's about choosing the word that most accurately reflects the specific action, really.
Precisely.
Okay, next on the list is drop, to let something fall. Usually it implies that it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah, the classic example. You accidentally drop your phone on the floor. We've all been there.
Oof. Yeah, that sinking feeling.
And that word, accidentally, that's really important because while you can drop something intentionally, the most common meaning is unintentional.
Right, so again, context matters.
For sure.
Okay, next up is lift, to raise something up. The example here is you lift a heavy box while cleaning your room. So it implies effort, moving something upwards.
And almost always, it means moving something against gravity. You wouldn't say you lift a feather off a table. You'd probably just say you pick it up.
Interesting. Subtle, but important.
Exactly.
Okay, next verb we have is open, to move something so it's no longer closed, like you open the door to let fresh air in.
It's about creating access, right?
Yeah.
And it signifies a change in state, from closed to open. And think about how many things we open every day. Doors, windows, books, containers.
A really versatile word.
And then, of course, we have its opposite, close, to shut something.
You close the book after finishing the chapter.
Right.
That signifies, an ending, a completion.
Right, it's that change of state, but going the other way. And it often implies a kind of conclusion or stopping point.
Like with open and close, I think it's interesting how so many of these basic verbs come in these pairs of opposites. It's almost like they naturally balance each other out.
It's a great way to remember them, too.
For sure. Okay, so now we're moving on to words for talking about people. And the first one here is neighbor, a person who lives near you.
So it's a relationship based on proximity.
Right, and it often has that sense of community, local connection. Like in the example, your neighbor invites you for a cup of tea.
Yeah, that's nice. It could be a close friend or just someone you know casually, but they share your immediate surroundings.
Okay, next we have guest, a visitor to your home. The example here is you prepare a meal for your guest, which really gets at that element of hospitality.
Yeah, and that act of preparing a meal, it shows a level of care, attention that you're giving to someone who's visiting your personal space.
All right, moving on to stranger, someone you don't know. And this is, a word that defines someone outside of your familiar circle, like a stranger asks you for directions.
What's interesting about stranger is that inherent lack of familiarity. It changes the dynamic, right? Like,
Right.
think about how different it is to ask a neighbor for help versus asking a stranger for help.
Yeah, it totally changes the situation.
Mm.
Okay, next up is relative, a family member.
So now we're talking about those broader family connections.
And the example here really emphasizes that. You visit a relative during the holidays.
Yeah, it really underscores how important those family ties are, especially during certain times of the year.
And finally, in this category, we have boss, the person in charge at work. Pretty clear-cut, right? It defines that hierarchical relationship in a professional setting.
Yeah, and understanding that word boss is essential for navigating the workplace. You need to know who's in charge, who has the authority.
Makes sense. All right, so now let's shift gears a bit and talk about transportation and travel vocabulary. First up is ticket, a pass for transportation.
Your authorization to travel, basically.
Okay. Like the example says, you buy a train ticket to travel to another city. It's your proof that you've paid and that you're allowed to be on that train. And tickets come in so many forms now, paper, digital, on your phone.
But the function is the same. It's about access.
For sure. Okay, next up we have airport, a place where planes take off and land.
I always find airports kind of fascinating. They're these hubs of international travel, connecting people from all over the world.
Yeah, they're definitely unique spaces.
And of course, knowing this word is essential if you plan on traveling by air. Like the example says, you arrive at the airport 2 hours before your flight.
Always good advice, especially these days.
Ah.
All right, moving on to luggage, bags used for travel.
So we're talking about everything you pack for a trip, whether it's a small carry-on or those giant checked bags.
And the example here shows a pretty standard scene.
Yeah.
You carry your luggage to the check-in counter.
Yeah, we've all been through that process. Okay, next up we have passport, an official travel document.
This one's essential for international travel, right? It's your identification, proof of your nationality.
Exactly. Like in the example, you show your passport at immigration. It's a common situation where you'll need to present it.
Makes sense. And finally, in this category, we have destination, the place you're going to.
So we're talking about the goal of your journey, the place you're aiming for. Like the example says, your flight's destination is Paris.
Sounds nice.
Doesn't it?
All right, let's move on to our next category, shopping and buying essentials. First up is price, the cost of something.
The amount of money you need to pay.
And of course, understanding price is crucial in any transaction.
For sure.
But I guess the question is, how do you know if a price is high or low?
Well, that depends on a whole lot of factors, right? Like what kind of product are we talking about? What's the brand? Where are you buying it? And then, of course, there's your personal budget and your perception of value.
Right, it's all relative.
Yeah.
Okay, move it on to cash, money in paper form.
The physical stuff.
Like the example says, you pay in cash at the grocery store. Though we do use cards for pretty much everything these days.
We do, but it's still important to understand what cash means, and there are definitely situations where it's still the preferred or even only accepted form of payment.
Good point. All right, next up we have bill, a statement of payment. Like in a restaurant, you ask for the bill after eating.
Yeah, that's the classic example. But remember, bill can also refer to other kinds of payment requests, like a utility bill or a phone bill. The context usually makes it clear what kind of bill we're talking about.
True. Okay, next word is change. Coins or small amounts of money returned after payment.
The money you get back.
Like the cashier gives you change after you pay. This one's important for understanding those cash transactions.
Absolutely. And lastly, we have wallet, a small case for money. You know, the place where you keep your cash, your cards, your ID.
A pretty essential everyday item for most people.
For sure. Okay, now let's move on to basic words for feelings and emotions. And the first one here is happy, feeling good and joyful.
Seems pretty basic, but is there a difference between, different kinds of happy? Like, are all happy feelings the same?
That's a good question. And the answer is no, they're not all the same. We can experience different levels of happiness, different types of happiness. You know, there's that fleeting moment of joy, and then there's that deep sense of contentment. And English actually has a lot of words to describe those nuances, like joyful, cheerful, pleased, elated. But happy is our general term, our starting point.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground.
It does.
All right, next up we have sad, feeling unhappy.
The opposite of happy, the other side of that coin.
And the example here is you feel sad when your best friend moves away.
And again, just like happy, sad is kind of a broad term. We can feel varying degrees of sadness, from just feeling a little down to being deeply depressed.
It's a spectrum, like most emotions.
Absolutely.
Okay, next up we have bored, feeling uninterested.
That lack of stimulation, like the example says, you feel bored when there's nothing to do.
I think we've all felt that at some point.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, moving on to tired, feeling low on energy.
Exhausted, drained. And that can be physical, mental, or often both.
Like after a really long day. After a long day, you feel tired and want to sleep. It's that natural desire for rest.
Exactly.
All right, and finally, we have jealous, feeling unhappy because someone has what you want.
This one's a bit more complex. It often involves feelings of insecurity, envy.
And the example gives us a pretty classic scenario. You feel jealous when your friend gets a promotion before you.
Yeah, a common trigger for those feelings. Okay, so now let's switch gears again and talk about technology and gadgets. First up is charger, a device that powers up electronics.
And essential in our modern world.
Absolutely essential. I mean, we rely on chargers to keep our phones, our tablets, our laptops alive.
Like the example says, your phone is at 5%, so you plug in your charger. We've all been there scrambling for that charger.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay, next up we have keyboard, a set of keys for typing.
The primary way we input text on most devices.
You type an email using your keyboard. Though we do use our phones for a lot of typing these days, too.
We do, but the concept of the keyboard, whether it's physical or virtual, is still fundamental.
And then, of course, we have mouse, that little device for controlling the computer.
You move the mouse to click on a link. And even though touch screens are so common now, the mouse is still a primary way to navigate, especially on desktop computers. It gives you that precision.
Okay, moving on to Wi-Fi. Wireless internet connection.
Another absolute essential these days. I mean, think about how much we rely on Wi-Fi for communication, for work, for entertainment.
And how frustrating it is when it doesn't work. Like, your Wi-Fi stops working in the middle of a video call.
Ah, the worst.
And finally, we have download, to save a file from the internet.
It's all about transferring that data from somewhere else to your own device.
Like you download a new song to your phone. We do that all the time for music, videos, documents.
It's a key concept for accessing digital content. Okay, last category. We're talking about basic words for food and drinks. First up, we have meal, food eaten at a certain time.
Like breakfast, lunch, dinner, they really structure our day, don't they?
They do, and they often have a lot of social and cultural significance. It's not just about, refueling our bodies.
It's about coming together, sharing a meal.
Exactly.
All right, next word we have is snack. A small amount of food eaten between meals.
Something to tide you over, like you eat a snack while watching TV.
A classic.
This is a common scenario.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, next up is juice, a drink made from fruit.
You drink orange juice with breakfast, another classic pairing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people associate juice with breakfast. And
Yeah.
there's just so much variety these days, all kinds of different fruits and flavors.
Yeah, it's a popular drink. Okay, moving on to ice cream, a frozen dessert.
You enjoy a scoop of ice cream on a hot day? Perfect for those warm summer days.
Absolutely a classic treat.
All right, and finally we have sugar, a sweet substance used in food.
That ingredient that adds sweetness to so many things, like you add sugar to your coffee for a better taste. Some people can't live without it.
Definitely a common ingredient.
Okay.
Last category, we made it. We're talking about weather and seasons. First up is sunny, bright with sunshine.
A beautiful day full of light.
Like the example says, you wear sunglasses because it's a sunny day. Sunny days really do affect our mood, our plans,
Absolutely. Sunny weather often makes us want to get outside, be more active.
for sure. Okay, next up is rainy, when it rains a lot.
So a day with precipitation.
And often it means we have to adjust our plans, grab an umbrella, like in the example, you carry an umbrella because it's a rainy morning.
Yeah, rainy weather definitely changes things up. Okay, moving on to cold, low temperature. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and it often dictates how we dress, right?
Yeah.
You wear a jacket because it's cold outside.
It's all about staying warm.
And then we have warm, slightly hot.
A pleasant temperature, often ideal for outdoor activities. The weather is warm, perfect for a walk.
Sounds nice.
It does.
All right, and finally, we have windy, when there's a lot of wind.
And wind can really affect our plans too. Like, it's too windy to fly a kite today.
Yeah, guess you need the right conditions for that.
You do.
So there you have it, 50 everyday English words. It might seem like simple stuff, but as we've talked about, these words are the foundation for so much of our daily communication.
Absolutely. And I think for anyone listening who's trying to improve their English, the takeaway here is that really understanding and using these words confidently can make a huge difference in your overall fluency. It's about building that solid base with the words you use most often.
Right, you're looking for practical knowledge that you can apply right away, and focusing on these high-frequency words, that's one of the most effective things you could do. It'll help you understand more, express yourself better, and just feel more comfortable speaking English in those everyday situations.
Exactly. So as you go about your day, try to pay attention to how often you encounter these words. You'll probably be surprised. And try to actively use them yourself. Think about, how much of a difference even this seemingly basic vocabulary can make in your ability to communicate. It's about consistency and making those words a natural part of your English.
What's a common situation for you where you think, okay, really focusing on these basics, that would make the biggest difference?